Welcome to Advanced Tactics by Unadvanced People.
Welcome back to Advanced Tactics Episode 2. In this episode, we're going to talk about using Null deploy, which basically means you don't, you hold back or don't deploy some or most or all of your army at the beginning of the game.
Well, it can be all, but...
Yeah, it can be all, but most of the time it's maybe just most or, yeah.
So the thing about Null deploy is it's a long conversation and it's going to go on a case-by-case basis, opponent-by-opponent level. Now, when I like to null deploy is when I go second. So in this case right now, we've rolled off for table side. Darren's deployed his whole army.
Yep, there we
So
go.
what he's going to do right now is, his army's out there and I go, okay, well Darren's got first turn, if he wants it. If we're playing out of the rule book, if you're playing ITC, Darren's going first. If you're playing out of the rule book, it's his choice to go first or second. So there's a nice ballet act between there. How many models do I put on the board so that Darren wants to go first? But then again, how many do I not put on the board in case he chooses to go first and then can table my army? So if I put like my bike units and I deploy them up front here, and I go, okay, Darren, do you want to go first or second? And he goes, oh, I want to go first. He's going to scout up and kill my bikes. And it was a waste. So what I want to do, generally as an Eldar player, it's something that you want to do. You can also do it with Space Marines, you can also do it with Dark Eldar, you can do it with Ravenwing. There's lots of armies you can null deploy with. We're going to use Eldar for example. So I've looked at this and I go, that Riptide Wing has a 42-inch threat range. I'm like, I got to be very careful to not lose my model. So I said, well, if I deploy any of my soft, squishy Eldar stuff on the board, I'm going to lose half my army turn 1, and then I'm probably going to lose the game. So I've decided to null deploy, which means I'm going to put all of this into reserve. I'm going to play the reserve game. Now there's things you can do for your army to help your reserve game. You can take a bunker with a comms relay, so you can reroll reserves. Most armies have access to that. Statistically, rerolling reserves is better than +1 to reserves. In Eldar, however, I've decided to take an Autarch, who's +1 to my reserve roll. Now, can you still null deploy if you're not manipulating reserves? Yes, it's just riskier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, just to remind you, if you have no models on at the end of a game turn, you lose. So you have to have some mechanism by which you're pretty much sure you're going to have some models on at the end of the game turn. Yeah.
So how I've done that, and a lot of armies can do this, we'll get into some advanced ways, but I've put 2 units of Warp Spiders, I've put them in opposite corners of the board, I've put them in cover. Now I've measured, I happen to know that the only things that could possibly shoot me are going to be 2 sets of smart missiles. And so if you do the math on that, that's 8, could be more, could be 16 shots, but it's super unlikely that 16 shots are going to kill 5 Warp Spiders.
Yep, and in this case they're actually probably out of range too, so.
Yes, so they would have to go 36 as their threat.
No, 36, yeah.
So that would be to there. So in this case they could hit them, but they probably can't hit my Warp Spiders back here. And of course, Warp Spiders can jump away, which is helpful. So you could also do, like if you're playing demons or something, you can put like a unit of Nurglings back here.
Yeah.
And then nobody can see them, and they're out of range of everything. And so if this is ITC, Darren has to go first. So his first turn, he can do nothing. My whole army's off the board. He can basically do a few shots here and there, and that's about it. He can, move up, get some objectives. And then what would happen is my army would come on from reserve. So, in this scenario here, he would have his first turn, and then I would roll for my reserves. My Warp Hunter would be able to come on. It could come on over here. Let's say all of his army pushes into this corner. I could then bring my army on in this corner, which is safer, so I could bring on my Hornets and things like that. Now the wicked thing about null deploying is you can choose a target, and you could come in and just kill that target. So now that Riptide, so even if he gives me first turn, my first turn I go, okay, your first turn. He moves up, does some stuff, I come on. Now I outrange him with these guys, so I ignore his interceptor. And I might be able to kill with a Warp Hunter and 3 Hornets. I should be able to kill a Riptide. That's getting rid of a ton of his firepower, and he was unable to do any damage to me. Now, some of the better things for null deploying is drop pods. So if you're a Space Marine player and you have a drop pod,
which we don't have today, unfortunately.
We don't, and mine are unpainted downstairs. So if Darren said, okay, let's say it's ITC where he has to go first, and I have a drop pod, I could actually put nothing on the board.
Yeah.
Drop like an empty drop pod or a full, like usually it's empty when you do this. Drop an empty, let's just pretend this is a drop pod, drop an empty drop pod right there. So Darren took his turn already, and then my turn too, Darren moves up, kills my drop pod. I don't care. Then I roll all my reserves and my army comes in.
Yeah, so drop pod is a great army that commonly would maybe null deploy because half your drop pods are guaranteed to come in your turn 1.
Yeah, and if you're going for null deploy, let's say you're playing Astra Militarum and you want to go for null deploy, you could even just take in like an Allied Blood Angels detachment with 5 scouts like a librarian to make your blob squad and the Shalom No Fear, and just take an empty drop pod as the fast attack. And that way you could start your guard stuff off the board. You could start all of your tanks and things like that and just bring them on. Because guardsmen have ways to modify it as well. Now another big advantage to null deploying is you could do like what's called the Scalpel Squadron. That's a Dark Eldar formation with 2 Venoms, and they deep strike turn 1. So anything that brings on reserves turn 1 can null deploy quite well.
Yeah.
But you know what? Any army can do it. You know, even Darren's Ravenwing there.
Yeah.
If let's say he's going second against my Eldar, and I go, okay, and I put all my Eldar on the board, and he's going second. So I have my whole Eldar army on, and it's like, well, he's going to lose a lot of his models to my Warp Hunter and my Hornets.
Yep.
I know the Eldar would have way more units than this. So in Darren's army over there, he could say, well, I'm going to null deploy. So he could say, okay, well, Chris is deployed. You measure here. This thing has 36 plus 12, so it has 48-inch range. So 48 goes to there. So he can hit to that corner, and he can hit to that corner. Yep. Shoot. So now you're basically looking at it, you're like, well, I can't get out of range. So what you can do is you can put your Riptide wing in one corner.
Yep, or behind, line of sight blocking.
In cover.
Yep.
Well, it's barrage, that thing.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And so you can do this and spread them out. Keep them out of range of the Hornets, but spread them out enough so that the templates can't hit multiples of them.
Yep.
Or you could even just put 2 on the board, and you could outflank or even reserve all of your Ravenwing bikes.
Yeah, and
so what this does
and their formation allows them to automatically come in on turn 2. So
yeah, and so the big part about this is what you've done is you've denied. So that Warp Hunter, we've kind of decided it's going to shoot turn 1 regardless. So he's basically denied the Hornets to take first turn in this game. They do nothing turn 1. So now he goes, okay, so now the Eldar player has a choice. Does he go first or does he go second? Depending on if you're playing Rulebook or ITC. So if the Eldar player chooses to go first, half of his army theoretically is now out of the equation. A good portion of yours is as well, but it is what it is. So it's a very good tactic, and I recommend always figuring out and always having some form of null deploying in your list. The most important thing to remember about null deploying is if you're going to start a unit on the board and it's going to get killed turn 1, what's the point? Sometimes there is a point. I have 9 Screamer units. I'm going to lose 2 of them, but the rest of them are going to turbo boost into your zone. I don't care if I lose 2 of them. I'm not going to null deploy. Your Tau, I have to get into your lines. But if you're playing a smaller, more elite army, and you're like, well, if I start on the board, I'm going to lose half my list, then definitely you want to play the reserves, put your units off. And a lot of people say, well, then I'm not killing his army. Yeah, but you're able to actually win on objectives through the long game, and you're not going to lose it turn 1.
Yeah.
So hopefully that, null deploying, we could talk all day.
Yep.
It's a very intense thing. You say, well, Chris, how many units do I null deploy, do I leave on the board? I always leave 1 extra unit from what I'm confident cannot get tabled. So if you have 3 Riptides like this, and they're here, and you can put your units in the range, and you can say, well, mathematically you could never kill them, then I'll only leave 1 unit on the board. But if you have them spread out here, and I go, well, you can kill 2, 4, 6, then I might leave 6 units on the board, or 5 if I'm risky, to guarantee that I don't get tabled.
Okay, so that's a quick jaunt through Null Deploy. I hope you guys found that useful, and stay tuned for more episodes.